disclaimer before I get into it, this is all opinion. So, you know, if you don't agree with my opinion, that's fine, you don't have to. That's why it's called an opinion. Everyone's entitled to their own opinions and thoughts and beliefs and stuff. So if you don't agree with some of the stuff in this video, just like be mature about it and go about today, preferably. Thank you. Hot takes is what this video is going to be. Things that I don't necessarily agree with, and things that some spaces or some certain like beginner witches and stuff think are like super important, but it turns out they're not really that important, or like they're made out to be this big thing that you have to worry about, and then it turns out that they're not really. Getting the big one out the way first, circles. If you've watched one of my previous videos, I think it's Beginner Witch to Vampyre Magic or whatever it was called, I think it was that one, I mentioned that I have never understood the need to cast a circle. Again, this is my opinion, so if you do that, that's fine. It's your practice, it's what you do. I mean, you can use a bottle cap to scry if you really want to, if it works for you. Whatever works, works and all that. But circles, the thing I want to mention today, other than not feeling the need to cast circles, is the reason I've never felt the need to cast circles. It's because, to me, again, in my opinion, I think that circles don't necessarily work the way that a lot of witches think they do. I don't think it's necessarily a protective barrier or something like that, and I'll go into why in a minute. I think it's more an amplifier, if that makes sense. Like sacred geometry, in a sense. It's something you can use to empower your spells or your rituals and stuff. It's not necessarily supposed to be for protective reasons. And the reason I think this is because, again, in my opinion, take a drink every time I say in my opinion in this video, but like make sure it's not alcoholic, you don't want to get drunk. But yeah, in my opinion, a lot of sources seem to water the spirits down in a sense. Witchcraft and like magic and that in and of itself is dangerous. They're not necessarily these big fluffy things that you can sugarcoat. Spirits have a mind of their own. They do not work in the same way that humans work. They do not follow our rules and regulations of the world because they're not human. They don't need to. So in a sense, the reason I say that like circles don't work in that way is because if a spirit doesn't abide by our laws and our rules and our regulations, what's to stop that spirit from looking at your magical barrier of a circle and going, oh, it's a magical barrier, I cannot step past that for whatever reason. As much as I really want to step past that and do harm to this magician, who's to say that they cannot do that? Which leads me very nicely onto protection. Yes, protection is important and stuff, but I don't think it's as important as some people make it out to be, because some people, it's a bit like that Jurassic Park line, you were too preoccupied with whether you could that you didn't stop to think about whether you should, sort of thing. You're that focused and occupied about it that you kind of forget the whole reason that you're doing it in the first place. Sometimes people think about like protection that much, like when was the last time you did a spiritual protection is a question you should be asking yourself, because if you're going, oh, recently, like 2 days ago, or like, oh, a week ago or something, do you necessarily need more spiritual protection? Has that first layer of protection that you've done fizzled out yet? Or is it still there? For an example, like a techie example, it's like having 3 antiviruses at once and all of them giving you false positives, basically. Are you absolutely sure that you need to do it? Another one that bothers me quite a bit, actually, considering my experiences, is Trickster Spirits. I know, you know, this kind of got amplified because of places like Witchtok mentioning like Trickster Spirits want to do all this and that and all that nasty stuff to you, and you have to make sure that you don't get a Trickster Spirit come through, and you have to vet and ask questions and everything to make sure that it's 100% that spirit that you want to communicate with, or that entity or deity or whatever that you want to communicate with. I have not had problems with this at all. I have not had a single Trickster Spirit in the way that, like, they're describing. I've not had a single Trickster Spirit show up. I have not had any malevolent spirits. I've not had anything try to eat me or try to, like, mess with my magic or throw something across the room, or I haven't felt the need to vet or anything because it just simply hasn't happened. I don't know whether it's because, like, social media is blowing this out of proportion, or whether it's just not that big of a deal, honestly, because I've been practicing witchcraft pretty much since I was about, 14. I'm 29 now, you do the math, and I've never experienced a trickster spirit. The only trickster spirit I've encountered per se, by definition because he is a trickster spirit, is Loki. That is it. Shadow work is another one, and hear me out on this one, because this one isn't, I don't know, this one doesn't really sound like that much of a hot take, but shadow work. People that put off their shadow work. Sometimes I can understand why you're putting off your shadow work. You're like, oh, I don't really want to work with shadow work and my inner self and my shadow and my darkness and my more primal and primordial side, because, I don't know, you're just not feeling it that day, or something's happened and you don't necessarily want to experience it, or something traumatic has occurred and you don't want to do that shadow work on your trauma because it's too recent, basically. But that's not what I'm here to mention about shadow work specifically. I can go on about shadow work quite a bit, actually, to be honest with you, but I will try to structure it. I don't know how popular this particular take is, but I found it in about 3 books now. It might just be the resources that I'm looking up, but there's an opinion going around about shadow work that your inner darkness or your inner shadow, or whatever you want to call it, is a separate part of you. It is the part that isn't you, or the you that isn't you. And I don't agree with this at all, because in my experience, and probably in most people listening to this experience, is that the shadow is you, but it's the more sort of darker primordial, sort of instinctual side of you. It's the side that you don't necessarily let out or show to the world because you don't necessarily need it anymore. It's sort of more your gut instinct or your survival mechanisms. I know this is an outdated take, but it's kind of like the, reptilian brain and all that sort of thing. It's your base animalistic self, and it's okay to embrace and play around with, honestly. If it's in a safe space, that you can tap into sort of your shadow work and your base instincts and your more primordial self and stuff, I say go for it. Everyone has it. It's a part of everybody, and no matter what anyone else says, it's a part of you. It's a part of you that you have to accept. Everyone has it. It's a little different for everyone, and in my opinion, it's a little similar to the whole subconscious, superconscious, and id psychology kind of similar thing, in that sense that there's 2 sides of you. To put it in vampiric aspects, you have the day side and the night side, and the day side is your more sort of basic side. It's your humanity side. It's the side that you show to everybody. It's the side that's basically out all the time. It's your base self, basically. And then you have the night side, which is what I'm explaining, basically. Shadow work, it's your more primal, more instinctual, more animalistic, your true nature, in a sense, as awkward as that sounds. I've always said that the best shadow work that you can do is the shadow work that you do not even realize that you're doing. You don't realize it's shadow work at the time, and then you look back at it and you go, oh, wait a second, I had this experience that I thought was just a downside in my life, or a tower moment, or whatever you want to call it. But it turns out that I learnt lessons from this, and I've grown from this spiritually, and I understand myself more now. Technically, that counts as shadow work, and that's what I mean by the best kind of shadow work is the shadow work that you do not realize that you are doing. There is a way in vampiric magic that you can integrate your night side, or your shadow self, or your inner dragon, or whatever the heck you want to call it. Every community has a slightly different word for it. I personally call it beast work, because beast is more inclusive than dragon is, personally, because I don't know what it is, and yeah, I get it as well. In your vampirism, you also get a lot of dragon symbolism, and I do not understand what the link is between vampires and dragons, but technically been happening ever since, Vlad the Impaler and the Order of the Dragon. Vampires also experience some sort of draconic symbolism or connection with dragons, so that's its own separate thing that I won't mention in this hot take video, but I thought it interesting to mention. Also, one quick thing, there is supposed to be a good book that explains the connection with vampirism and dragons and fairies and stuff, but I found it way too heavy on the religious dogma, and I couldn't really get through it. I looked up a PDF of it and I'm just no, this is not what I'm looking for, and I actually couldn't find the bit that the recommendation mentioned. I couldn't find the bit between vampires and dragons in it at all, so I don't know where that came from, but if you're looking into it and someone's recommended it to you as well, but you don't want to have this whole sort of like religious dogma and you need to be this sort of way to practice this witchcraft and you need to be of witch blood and blah 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 and all that sort of stuff. It's a little bit religious dogma and it's a little bit gatekeepy. I suggest you avoid the book. It's called The Dragon Legacy, Secret History of an Ancient Bloodline. And it's a very old book. It's from, I think, like 2003 or something like that. But I did not get on with it personally. You might like it more than I did, but yeah, to me it was a bit too religion heavy and a little bit too gatekeepy in who can be and who can't be a witch or wizard or whatever. So yeah, I didn't get on with it personally. It's a tip for you before you look into a book that you're not sure if you're going to like, or it's an expensive sort of like magic grimoire or something and you don't know if you want to spend that much money on it. If you can, and I know this doesn't work for every single grimoire out there and it's a little unfortunate, but if you can, look for a PDF of the book that you are not sure on first. It will save you a lot of money and a lot of time and patience in the long run, honestly. For example, Grimoire of Tiamat or the Book of Citra Ara and stuff like that, they are on, and lovely website for finding like spell books and stuff, they are on archive.org, so always look for a PDF of the book that you want first, just in case you don't get on with it or whatever, because that way you haven't wasted any money. I wasn't expecting a witchy tip in a hot takes video, was you? I did have a bit on Glamoury, but Audacity just decided to just balk on me, so I'll either do it again or I'll make it a separate video. I might just make it a separate video, honestly, because it was about like, and it's really unfortunate that Audacity decided to crash on me about it, because, so yeah, if I remember, I will make that a separate video. It was about Glamoury and how people use Glamoury and how vampires could use Glamoury for themselves, and basically my opinion on comments such as, I've never had them but I've seen them in other places, but comments such as, if you think you're a real witch, why do you wear all these robes? Or, if you think you're a real vampire, why do you wear the fake fangs and the contact lenses and, you know, all the fancy shirts and stuff like that? And basically, in layman's terms, bad take. I'm not going to go into why it's a bad take here. That will be in its own video because Audacity hates me today. But be on the lookout for that as a separate video. It will probably be titled something such as Vampires versus Glamoury or something like that. So that's a bit unfortunate. Technology. Isn't it a wonderful thing? Alright, so to prevent my Audacity from crashing on me again, because obviously it does not want to behave itself today, I'm going to leave this episode of whatever this was here, and I will see you guys in a future video.